Right, so let's get started with the context. Now, in Ireland, there are some hurdles for learners and teachers. Okay, so first of all, the learner hurdles, the first hurdle is in Dublin and in Ireland, I believe. Our classes are almost monolingual, okay, because in all the schools I worked in Dublin, basically the 70% of our student base was from Brazil, right? So Portuguese speakers, monolingual classes almost, right? And that's the first hurdle. Then what I found as a teacher was a general lack of comprehension, of course, in lower levels, but also in a higher one, right? So students would be able to use good structures, but they wouldn't be able to understand native speakers very well, right? And also other nationalities. And also another hurdle is there is a lot of traditional teaching. So what I mean is the teaching is really focused on grammar and textbooks. So many teachers follow the textbook. Now, this is because of the next point here. There are some hurdles for teachers as well. Now, the first one, I think, is the syllabus. Now, by hurdle, I don't mean syllabus is a bad thing. So, I mean, teachers have to follow it. Now, this goes beyond the teaching. This is mostly because in Ireland, most of our learners are on an immigration visa, and we need to show immigration that students understand certain things at the end of the course. Okay, they need to take an exam and etc. etc. So we need to follow the syllabus, and oftentimes in many schools the syllabus is just the index of a textbook. It's just copy and paste, right? And next, also, well, there is traditional teaching either for the syllabus, okay, and also because some students expect a lot of grammar because in their countries, the teaching is also traditional. So they do expect a lot of grammar in their teaching, okay? And that can also be a hurdle. So I thought about this, and in my master's also, I had a very interesting lesson from Professor Norbert Schmidt. So Norbert Schmidt is an emeritus professor of applied linguistics in Nottingham. And this is his website if you want to check it out. It's really interesting. And so what Norbert Schmidt explains in his theories, let's say, is there is a linear relationship between vocabulary coverage and comprehension, right? So this is obvious, right? The more vocabulary you have, the better you can understand something, right? In any language, not just in English, okay? So this was the first factor that made me kind of switch my teaching a little bit towards vocabulary, yeah? Now, in practice, let's see what it means in practice, okay? So now, first thing, in my teaching, what I do is I don't always take books and syllabi at face value. Okay, we all know that. I'm not saying this is not important, or I'd be mad to say this. I'm not saying this. So I'm just saying that books and syllabi, they are standardized, okay, but not everyone is the same, right? So we need to take them like sometimes with a pinch of salt, right? So we know that the European framework tells us that learners should be able to do certain things at a certain level, right? But one thing is what they should be able to do. Another thing is what they know, right? Next is make sure to teach enough vocabulary as well as grammar, right? So I'm not saying grammar is not important. Again, I'd be a madman to say that. I'm not. I do teach a lot of grammar as well, but I also teach a lot of vocabulary, right? I give them the same importance. And in textbooks, sometimes they don't have the same importance, right? Grammar is always king. So the way I see language is the following. So a new language is like a puzzle with many pieces, right? So the grammar is the technique. So it's the way we put the pieces together. So it's very, very important. But the vocabulary is the pieces. So if we don't have the pieces, how can we put them together, right? And next, so how to do this, right? This is all interesting, but how are we gonna do this in practice? So what I do is I expand the vocabulary suggested by the book or find new vocabulary relevant to the grammar of the day, right? Suggested by the book. Again, in Ireland, sometimes we need to follow the textbooks. It doesn't mean to use the textbooks, but we need to follow the topic in the textbook, right? And oftentimes the topic is the grammar, right? So how can you expand this? Find new vocabulary, or expand the one suggested by the book. There are really good books. For example, there is Oxford Vocabulary. That is an excellent book. Also, another important thing is to link the old and the new vocabulary, right? So it's very important to give students a revision of the old vocabulary so they don't forget, and to link it, to the next lesson. So now the feedback. So what I found in my teaching, since I started implementing this kind of approach, is that my students had better fluency and better comprehension. They could understand better, they could read better, they could speak better, right? I'm not saying it's just because of increased vocabulary teaching, because I never ran any, let's say, I don't have scientific proof to say that, right? It's just my own impression, but I think this was a good contributor towards their increased fluency, okay, and comprehension. And next thing is, I found that my students could level up faster, and could also get better level test results, especially in comprehension, but also in production tasks. Then benefit to others and conclusions, right? So how could this benefit other teachers and other people, right? Now, first of all, it's very nice because this method helps you create, let's say, tailor-made activities, right? So you're going to go beyond the textbook. And I believe the next presentation is going to be on this. So I think we can tie nicely with the next presentation as well. And increase student engagement and motivation, right? So students often lapse into their L1 language in Dublin, right? Because many of them speak the same language. So even if they know complex structures in English, if they lack vocabulary, they will go back to their L1 because it's the only language they have. They don't know otherwise. Instead, if they have enough vocabulary, they'll be able to not switch back to L1 as much, right? And they will feel motivated because they will be like, oh, look at me, I'm speaking, so I think it's good for them. And also this leads to less social awkwardness, right? Sometimes students, especially let's say elderly students, or lower levels ones, they feel awkward in social situations because they don't know what to say, they can't find the right word, so they're very shy in certain situations, right? But by having better comprehension, this could be kind of avoided in certain situations, right? Again, less L1 lapses and L1 reliance. Okay, so this is very important. I felt that it was instrumental in my classes in Dublin, again, because L1 is dominant in certain situations, especially at lower levels, right? And by teaching more vocabulary, it could be kind of, controlled. So I'm very time conscious. Okay, so I'm gonna end my presentation here. Thank you very much, Gabriela. Thank you everyone for listening.
That was fantastic, Domenico. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. We do have a few questions. So the first one is, how should knowledge and skills be related in a syllabus? There can be high knowledge and low skills and vice versa, or they can be related to the CEFR. Yeah, I think that was a question.
Right, very good question there. Knowledge and skills. Well, I think we should always kind of use them in tandem, right? So we often think of them as a separate, like a separate entity, but they are not. So yeah, so related to the CF4, where the CF4 tells us what students can do at that level or what they should be doing at that level, right? But it doesn't tell us what they know, right? So yeah, that's a tricky question. Like I have to admit, but I think yeah, it's good to use them in tandem. You know, we don't have to think of them as separate entities. They can be blended together, and they should be, in my opinion.
And they can all fit together, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. The next question is related to increasing vocabulary. So, do you prefer vocabulary games or controlled activities? Which one do you think is more effective?
Right. I think again, both are okay and they're complementary. So you can use them both. I honestly I love games. Yes, I love games, but they're not good for everyone. Some students don't like them, so I wouldn't overdo it. You know. Yeah.
Yes, you have mentioned that you like connecting and linking the old and new vocabulary, right? Do you have any activities that you'd like to either suggest or describe to us?
So activities, usually at the start of a new lesson, I would go over the last one, and for example, I would do a race with my students. So I would ask them to race to the board and to write as many words as possible related to the last lesson, and then I would give, for example, a piece of chocolate to the winners. Like